Who's doing the benediction, Rebecca? Maybe she could do that too. She's over and I'm probably talking to somebody who's talking. It's 6 o'clock. Where is Sarah back there? Are you good to go? Good evening, brothers and sisters. The Lord be with you. Let us begin with prayer. Will you pray with me? Good and loving God, be present with us as we gather for the work that you have called us to be about this evening. Be our wisdom, guiding our conversations and decisions. Enable us to do our work according to the guidance of your Holy Spirit, to the end that our congregations prosper and our presbytery is faithful. May what we do encourage all whose lives we touch, provide for their needs, and draw them to yourself, even as your Spirit equips us to minister to a broken and needy world. And so would you challenge us, encourage us, transform us, and sustain us to the end that with joyous and thankful hearts we might be always your faithful witnesses. In Jesus' name and for his sake we ask this. Amen.
Please join me as we call ourselves to worship. The sinners, the saints, the broken, the whole.
We all come seeking the one who offers grace and hope.
The doubters, the devout, the wanderers, the wanderers.
We all seek to follow the one who works for justice and hope for all God's people.
The hesitant, the heroic, the grandparents, the little children.
We all listen for the songs of joy
That all creation sings to the one who gives life and peace. Let us worship God.
The Reverend Jen Dunphy serves in the validated ministry of our presbytery as the chaplain of the National Presbyterian School. And of course, there are partners in ministry here at National Presbyterian Church. And I'd like to just have a brief, I guess it's a minute for mission, for Jen to tell us a little bit about her work, what the school does, and who these wonderful children are who have led us in worship this evening.
Thank you, Quinn. This is my 8th year as the chaplain of the National Presbyterian School. Our school has 300 students, ages 3 through 6th grade. We are a mission of NPC and do much ministry on this campus together for children and their families. In my work, I teach religious studies, I do pastoral care, service learning and partnerships in the community, and I lead chapels twice a week with these wonderful students. Today, it was the chorus that sang to you, thanks to Ms. Shuford, our chorus director, and Ann Hancock, our accompanist tonight. Also, thank you to these chorus students and their families. It was a 3-day weekend, and they all arrived with their chorus uniforms. That is pretty amazing, and we are thankful. It is a great blessing to serve the presbytery in this way and to have partners here across campus with NPC, so thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight.
Again, Jen and all of the chorus, we thank you so much for leading us in worship this evening. As we continue, let's express our appreciation one more time.
Now let us come to our gracious and merciful God with our prayer of confession. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he who is faithful and just will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Let's all join together in the prayer of confession. Lord, we say, I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. We say yes, yes, but we must be merciful and capitalist. Lord, you say, they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. We say, children are the future of the church, and denying that they are the church. Lord, you say, in old age they will produce fruit. They are always green and full of sap. We say it is a shame that the elderly, the infirm, the injured, the inconvenient inevitably lose touch with their congregation. Lord, you say, I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. We say, this is the way we do things. The way we have done things. Forgive us, Lord. Forgive us for living with our heads and on our hearts. Forgive us for choosing the path of most convenience. Forgive us for living as our life. Break us open to your ever-flowing, ever-changing waters. Make us people changed and changing by the power of the Holy Spirit and according to your word. Amen.
Friends, believe the good news of the gospel. As far as the east is from the west, God has removed our transgressions from us and remembers them no more. Friends, believe the good news of the gospel.
In Jesus Christ, we are forgiven.
Thanks be to God.
God calls us to be a praying people, so let us join in prayer. Gather with those seated near you and share your prayers of joy or lament. When you hear the first chime, we will enter a time of silent prayer. At the ringing of the second chime, individuals are invited from where you are seated to lift a personal prayer, so just speak out. And at the ringing of the third chime, we will pray the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
We turn now to business before us, and I invite our stated clerk, Sarah Coe, to lead us through the omnibus motion.
Before I move the omnibus motion, I want to note that in the Presbytery reports, there's an incomplete list of our minister members. We will correct that report, and when it's in the minutes as they're finally put up on the website, you will see a corrected report. Meanwhile, I move the omnibus motion, which is located on page 9 of your packet.
And I don't see anyone at a microphone, so I think we have a complete omnibus motion. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed, no. It's carried. Now it's time for transitions. Karen Shamus.
It's always a joy to welcome new folks into the Presbytery, and so I would invite Rick Hansen to come forward at this time. And we've had a chance to meet a bit and talk, but I'm really looking forward to having you say a few words. Standard, 20 minutes, right? Is that what we heard? Two.
How can you limit a preacher to 2 minutes? That's hard. Well, I want to bring you greetings from Chicago Presbytery. If you think it's cold here, I guarantee you it's colder there. I'm glad to be here. We moved here last year. I've had several different titles over my 40-year career. I've been a called pastor in 3 different congregations. I've been a PCUSA mission co-worker in Ethiopia for 4 years, an interim head of staff at 2 different congregations, and most recently my title is a ministry coach. I'm also a husband of 44 years and a dad of 3 kids. One thing I'll tell you about me, just a little story. I worked my way through seminary as a young life leader. And being an introvert, I wasn't your typical young life leader, if you know a lot about young life. And so my very first club meeting, I was in a family's living room. I was packed with kids, and I wanted to be inconspicuous, so I was in the back, and I sat on this windowsill, and I wanted to be even more inconspicuous, so I was leaning back, and I shattered the window pane behind me. And 50 pairs of eyeballs zeroed in on me, and one of the leaders said, "Oh yeah, this is Rich. He's one of our new leaders." And yet, young life is really where I learned about ministry that set the trajectory for the rest of my life. Building relationships is how I believe ministry happens. And so I've had a chance to do that in lots of different places, in lots of different settings. Probably the most impactful for me was the 4 years we spent in Ethiopia. That was a transforming experience for me and brought me back full circle to where I started in young life in doing cross-cultural ministry. And so that's what I hope to do. In fact, I'm leaving in less than a month to be in Ethiopia and Zambia and put on my ministry coaching hat, and I'm coaching NGO leaders and school leaders in ways that they can be transformational and use a coaching culture to increase their capacity of their organizations. And I'm hoping to share a little bit of that in some ways here with you. So thank you for your welcome today, and God's blessings.
A couple other transitions. Do you know how to become honorably retired? It's not like Carnegie Hall kind of thing, practice, practice. But seriously, you know how to be retired, right? Some of us have figured that out. Do you know what you need to do to become honorably retired? Tell the session that's what you want, exactly. And then what you do is you write an email to Colette Ram at the Presbytery office asking for that designation, and it's voted on by specialized ministries. That's it. The thing is that some of our folks don't know that that's what they have to do, and sometimes they don't figure that out until, I don't know, Larry, how long has it been? 16 months. 16 months. Poor Larry has just been retired. Tonight, he is honorably retired. Another person that we moved to honorably retired tonight is William Jockola. William, are you here? Can we applaud? Six years to figure it out. All right. So those of you who've been waiting in the wings, waiting for that honorably thing to descend upon you, all it takes is a letter. So if you have any questions, please see me. I'll be happy to make sure that you're connected to the right folk. And we need to figure out a way to honor our retired folk better. You need to know specialized ministry is working on that. And we're just grateful that you continue to be a part of this presbytery and to give your gifts. And we are grateful for you, honorably retired or not. Transitions is also when we remember and pray for those who are grieving. And so tonight I would also ask that we would lift up Nancy Fox and her family as they continue to grieve the passing of her father. And also that we would grieve with Chuck Booker as we remember his mother and her passing as well. Let us come before our God in prayer. Holy One, author and giver of life, in the middle of all the chaos, you are our rock and our sure foundation. Remembering you as our foundation and the promise that you offer, we pray for Nancy and her family and Chuck and his family as they grieve the passing of parents. We come to, O God, with prayers of thanks for new ministry in our midst. We bring prayers of gratitude for members of this presbytery who traveled to Puerto Rico and who brought with them their sweat, their tears, their hearts. We offer prayers of encouragement and support for those who aren't sure where their next paycheck will come, and for those congregations that are finding ways to actively support them. We're grateful for Rich Hansen, who joins us in ministry here, and pray that he might find a place where he can fully offer his many gifts. We're grateful for Larry Greenslet and William Jockolo, who may have counted themselves as retired before, but now are honorably so. Tonight, oh God, we're also delighted that we can celebrate Lawan Quander's 35 years of service to this presbytery. And now, oh God, even with hearts overflowing with thankfulness, we know there is much work to do. Give us courage for these days. Help us to resonate deeply with the words of your preacher who said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Give us courage to respond to the hatred shared on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Give us the courage to lift our voices and to act in care and concern for those who are suffering and those who are oppressed. Give us the courage to be the light that isn't covered by a bushel of fear or insecurity, but instead the light that shines so that others might know you. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our Christ and Savior. Amen. I'm going to invite Ann Herlin up. And also, I need staff members up here. Staff. Debbie?
So while they are gathering, sorry.
That's yours.
Can Lawan see these?
That's yours.
Should get on the risers.
You do.
I have been in the presbytery for 17 and a half years now, which is half of 35. And over time, I have found that there are certain things at presbytery meetings you can count on. Mark Stunder's meteorological analogies, for example, or Madeline Jervis introducing herself as honorably retired. And Lawan Quander taking the microphone and, in essence, calling us all to attention. With humor, but with firmness, Lawan insists that we pay attention to the mission of this presbytery. And every time she reminds us that each and every one of us needs to do our part to carry it out. Lawan joined the presbytery staff on January 1st of 1984, and today we celebrate her 35 years of service and counting. As our director of communication, she is relentlessly in touch with what is going on in the life of this presbytery, and it's her mission to be sure we are as well. She continues to bring us along in this era of social media. She tries to find the technology to help us, and she coaches and prods and encourages us. She is consistent and insistent in keeping us informed and in reminding us of our responsibility to do the same. Email, website, Thursday mail, mission highlights, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, everything she produces is done well, and we appreciate the gifts that she brings. And we are also grateful for the wealth of institutional knowledge and organizational memory that Lawan brings. She has seen us through countless transitions. She knows the churches and she knows us. And what I particularly appreciate about Lawan is that she will speak up. She will give her perspective, often offering some helpful insight, and she will hand that to you and then let you do your work. So Lawan, on behalf of the presbytery, we thank you for your service and your insight and your leadership and your prodding and for all you do. And we especially thank you for your commitment to this presbytery and to the work of Christ in this world as we do our best to be part of it. So in honor of your service, we hope you will enjoy these flowers.
Yep.
We have a special presentation.
Yes, we are not done. You know, Wilson had such an incredible way with words, and he would probably at this moment say something beautiful. I'm not going to do that. I don't write narrative like that. I write what my husband calls doggerel. And you are all going to help me because we are going to serenade Lawan. Oh, yes. Yes, we are. And the staff has helped me by holding up cue cards. And look, even Billy is at the piano ready to play. So the tune for tonight, a good Scottish tune, is My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. The chorus is simply Lawan, Lawan. So here we go. Lawan, Lawan. You have to double that. We're grateful for all that you do. And then we go back. Lawan, Lawan. We're grateful for you being you. So you have to skip to the last one. You got this? Okay. So, Okay, so there. Okay, so let's try that together. Okay. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do. You do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you. Very nice. Okay, you're going to do that after each of the verses. Oh, yes, there are verses. I shall start. Our director of communications has been here for 35 years. In our presbytery, she's a legend. So join us in this thankful cheer. Oops, here we go. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you.
She makes sure you get all the info. You need to be good presbyters. From the website and Facebook and YouTube, Thursday mailing and even Twitter.
Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you. Stewardship couldn't be here, so I'm singing for them. But did you know that she also resources the Stewardship Committee with ease, helping them to help all of our churches to locate a few more pennies? Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you.
The source we've been told is no longer. Spiritual formation has filled in the void. Lawan also resources team, and for that we're quite overjoyed.
Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you.
You'll find her here at Presbytery Meetings, sitting here where she puts stuff on the screen. Without her, there would be no more pictures. She's our audio-visual queen.
Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you.
Whenever a question arises about some detail of NCP's past, another sterling quality we prize is Lawan's deep memory so fast. Roll Tide!
Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do, you do. Lawan, Lawan, we're grateful for you being you. Last verse.
So Lawan, we're incredibly grateful for what you do and who you are. For 35 years you've put up with us. So here's to 35 more.
Woo-hoo! Lawan, we're grateful for all that you do. Lawan, we're grateful for you being you. Did you want to say something?
It sounded good. I thought that was absolutely beautiful, but true to me, let me see what's in this card, and then we'll see what I'm going to have to say. I don't have my glasses on, so I don't really see. It's real? I just want to thank you all so very much. No, I really am at a loss for words, Karen. Thank you so much. That was incredibly creative. I found the picture on the screen. I think someone took that picture of me. I probably had been on staff for maybe a month. So I was like 12. 23 years old when I came to this presbytery. I've grown up in this presbytery. I got married in this presbytery. I had my babies in this presbytery. I've done a lot in this presbytery. I thank you for allowing me to grow, expand communication as it is today. I thank you for tolerating me for pushing you in ways you might not often want to be pushed. And it's been an incredible journey and one that I continue to enjoy being on. Now, for those of you who keep asking when I am retiring, this is not the federal government. I do not get credit for service. I only get credit for age, so that you will not ask me that question again. I am 57. I'm 57, technically cannot retire, so I'm sick till I'm 62. So don't ask me again when I'm retiring. Do the math. I have to do minimally 62. I have spent my entire adult working career with National Capital Presbytery. I will leave no benefits on the table. Okay? Do the math. Ask me that question 5 years from now. And have to be 62 minimally. I am 57. I'm not leaving tomorrow or next year. So in 5 years, there you go. Thank you very much. It's been an honor. It continues to be a privilege. I appreciate you allowing me to be me and serve you in the way that I have for the last 35 years. Thank you.
For the remaining business of this meeting, I would like to invite Vice Moderator Miriam Dewhurst to lead us.
Thank you, Quinn. And my first action will be to invite Quinn Fox to bring the report of the Bills and Overtures Committee.
At least I didn't have to introduce myself this time. Just to clarify, the moderator of the Presbytery does not chair the Bills and Overtures Committee. It just so happens that the chair of the Bills and Overtures Committee was in his 4th year of leadership of that committee when he was elected moderator. So here we are, and this is tonight's business. You have received in the Presbytery Pack the list of overtures, and the Bills and Overtures Committee has met twice, and we are proposing to vote on some of the overtures this evening, and those have been outlined in your order of business, and then the remaining at the March meeting. All of these overtures, all of these are proposed amendments from the General Assembly. So they began in presbyteries around the country, 3 years ago or more, and were voted on by individual presbyteries and concurred by other presbyteries, and then were submitted to the Office of the General Assembly far enough in advance of the meeting of the Assembly last summer in St. Louis, and each of these were assigned to an appropriate committee. As it turns out, the majority of the business that is going to be a constitutional amendment was assigned to the Church Polity and Ordered Ministry Committee, which happened to be the committee that I was assigned to. So, I mean, it just, the gift that keeps on giving. All of these have been approved by the General Assembly. And so the Constitution, the changes to our Constitution, well, that's familiar. They start in one place in a deliberative body, and then they need to be ratified. And they need to be ratified broadly. And so all of the 172, last count, presbyteries will be voting on all of these amendments. These are all amendments that are proposed to be added to our Constitution. In this case, it's the Book of Order and the Rules of Discipline. And so it is up to us to say yes and to ratify, or to say no and to vote against the ratification. And there is a third potential, and that is to take no action, which is the equivalent of a no vote, but it's like an abstention. So without further ado, I will present the committee's recommendation, which you've been able to read, for the amendments more or less in order. Amendment 18A, the election of ruling elders and deacons, which amends Form of Government 2.0401. This amendment, as you've read it, clarifies the minimum size of a congregational nominating committee as 3, and that the majority of the voting members of the committee must be members of the congregation not currently on session. And basically what this amendment does is it enables smaller congregations to be able to go through the process with a reduced number. It does not prescribe the number, it just reduces the minimum. The Bills and Overtures Committee recommends approval, in other words, concurrence with the General Assembly's action.
The motion is from the Bills and Overtures Committee, so it does not require a second. Are there any questions? Is there any debate? Seeing none.
Someone's moving.
Oh, sorry.
Joanne Stabler, teaching elder from Bealton. My congregation is about 20. We have 3 on session. It doesn't seem realistic to have 3 on the nominating committee, and because it doesn't leave very many people to be nominated, and half of those 20 are Lutherans, and the other half are Presbyterians. I'm just wondering, we embed something like this in what is now supposed to be a slimmed down, flexible constitution, with an arrangement for small churches, which sort of is usually defined as under 100. We have 20. And so I would vote against this because I will restrict my congregation in a way that is not going to be viable.
calling on the stated clerk.
Just one thing to that. Being on a nominating committee does not preclude you from being nominated by that nominating committee. So it's not totally as bad as perhaps you thought it would be.
Anyone to speak in favor? Anyone else to speak against? Then let us proceed to the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, nay. It carries.
Amendment 18D, membership of Presbytery, which amends the form of government 3.0306. This amendment introduces into the Book of Order rules that govern the work by a teaching elder outside of the bounds of that teaching elder's presbytery of membership, and it, as I understand it, clarifies and puts some language back in that was originally taken out when we revised the form of government, and apparently we now think it is necessary to have it back in. And so this is just, again, a clarification. And the Bills and Overtures recommends that we approve this, again, following the action of the General Assembly.
Again, no second is required. Are there any questions? Is there any debate? Then we'll proceed to the vote. All those in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. The amendment is Amendment D, right, is agreed to.
We present Amendment 18E. This amendment corrects an unintended consequence of an earlier change from the 222nd General Assembly to make clear that all ministers of word and sacrament, and not just those who are pastors, have access to Committee on Ministry or its equivalent. We are, again, in the wake of the revised form of government that tried to make a point out of the difference between a ruling elder and a teaching elder, and then that was unacceptable, so we changed teaching elder back to minister of word and sacrament, but somewhere along the line there was an ambiguity. This clarifies the ambiguity, and that's in G 3.0307, and the Bills and Overtures Committee recommends approval, in other words, that we ratify the action of the Assembly.
There's no need for a second. Are there any questions? Any debate? Then we'll proceed to the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Amendment E is approved.
And that leads us to Amendment 18H, which is in two parts. The simpler is 18H, F, like I said. The welcoming to the table. So you will perhaps recall when we debated this particular change to the directory for worship about language welcoming to the table. And there was lots of conversation. This is not about the conversation that we had on whether or not the word baptism should be in the invitation, but it is all about the idea of welcoming to the table in the right way to welcome. This changes so that the welcome is not specified as the session welcoming someone to the table, but that persons are welcomed. That's the passive voice. There was some concern that the notion of the session welcoming someone to the table could be construed as an act of a first communion. And while some traditions value very much the idea of a first communion, that's not something that's part of the Reformed tradition. That's not our understanding of the sacrament, and it's not the practice of our congregations. I suppose that there are some congregations who do have a prescribed order and way in which children first come to the table, but many of our congregations do not. So this just clarifies that there is nothing like a first communion or a process that is prescribed for all Presbyterians.
They should be honorably welcome.
And we are not voting on changing the language. We are only voting on whether to follow the guidance, or rather the action of the Assembly, whether or not to approve. And the Bills and Overtures Committee recommends that we do also approve this change to the Constitution.
Again, no need for a second. Are there any questions? Is there any debate? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Amendment F, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Amendment F is approved.
Now 18H is in two parts, as I said. H2 is more straightforward, and so I will make that recommendation first. I don't think that it is any way necessary for whatever happens with H1. So 18H2 basically provides that in instances where sexual abuse takes place, that the person who is the victim of that abuse is understood as anyone without capacity to consent. This changes the specific language of mental capacity and just broadens it to any way that capacity might be defined. And so with the broadening of that and also any potential stigma that might be implied about mental incapacity being removed, we agreed with the Assembly and recommend approval.
No need for a second. Are there any questions? Is there any debate? Then we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of H2, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, please say no. Amendment H2 is approved.
Amendment 18H1 is also pertains to this very unfortunately timely and relevant issue of sexual abuse. And it has to do with the time limit in which a person can be reported. And it changes some language to remove any type of loopholes, I suppose. And so this adds language so that there's no time limit for charging a person who knew or reasonably should have known of the reasonable risk of sexual abuse of another and failed to take reasonable steps to minimize the risk. We spent a lot of time as a committee looking at this, and while all of us, there was no question that we felt that there needs to be as much accountability as is possible. In the end, we found that the language is rather or significantly ambiguous. And as we wrestled with what to do with it, what we would have liked to do with it is change the language, but that's not an option for us. All we can do is recommend is to vote as a presbytery either for it or against it. But in the end, we thought that the most responsible course of action that we would recommend to our presbytery, knowing that there will be conversation and debate and that ours is only a recommendation, is the recommendation to take no action. And basically, this is our attempt to register concern and even complaint over the ambiguity of the language without voting against the need for accountability. In our mind is the knowledge that even now there is a task force that is in the process of revising the rules of discipline, and that inevitably they are going to be looking specifically at this particular issue because it's been raised by the overture process and now the proposed amendment process. We also voted in the committee that if we do take no action, that we would write a letter to the task force explaining why we voted the way that we voted on this, if we vote this way, and any other amendments that we might vote on. Primarily those that we would not have an affirmative vote on, but really, in the end, we may send the letter regardless of how we end up voting as a presbytery based on the extensive conversation that we have. And so because this is not a straightforward either recommendation for or against, I move on behalf of the Bills and Overtures Committee that National Capital Presbytery take no action on Amendment 18H. And I think in the process of explaining the overture and our process, I've already spoken to why we recommended that the way that we did. Madam Moderator, that is the motion from the Bills and Overtures Committee.
Motion does not require a second. Are there questions?
I guess the question that I have is...
You should go to the microphone.
Could you please go to the microphone? Thank you. And please tell us who you are and what congregation you represent.
Yeah, Paul Gabicki, New Hope Presbyterian, ruling elder. I'm just wondering, as a former law enforcement officer, if we take no action, how long is it going to be that this loophole will exist that potentially would let suspects identified after the fact go free?
I think that's probably, at least in part, best addressed by the stated clerk to tell us what the current rules of discipline have to say about this.
There is no time limit.
So currently there is no time limit.
So there's no 5-year time limit now?
No, I think there is.
So why don't you, Karen's at the mic.
No, I believe that the General Assembly that met in Syracuse, which number I can't remember, actually struck that, and there is no time limit on reporting sexual misconduct or malfeasance.
What this is doing is expanding that to cases of not a person who committed malfeasance.
Understood.
But a person who knew or should have known of it. And
precisely, but what I heard the questioner asking was, what is the current situation for folks who have committed? And that was removed.
Right. Yes.
I was actually one of the co-authors of the removal of that. So just speaking very briefly to the intent, because I think it helps to couch this entire conversation, the intent of that original removal of the time limit was so that we might talk about things like confession and forgiveness, which has no time limit, unlike civil courts. So
let's stay with questions.
More questions?
Ruth Hamilton, minister at MWS from Westminster, D.C. I guess my first, and I admit, Quinn, I didn't read through this fully, but so my first impression is, ugh. I don't want, it feels wrong. It feels wrong to take no action on this. As somebody who might be supervising somebody who does do an act of sexual misconduct, I would want to be willing to be held in account for that. I'd rather err on that side of making my life difficult and learning from that than the other way around. So I just think where we are in this world with the church, that we have to go beyond what is easy, to just to put ourselves out there and say, look, we are all responsible for this, and we have to be willing to keep alert at all times. And if this helps me do that, then I'm all for it. So I'm not comfortable personally with taking no action. So I will vote for. I think that's the amendment. Thank you.
Is anyone speaking in favor of no action?
Susan Etherton, ruling elder, Arlington Presbyterian, and a member of the Bills and Overtures Committee, and also Commissioner to General Assembly. Really, Quinn spoke very clearly about the discussion that the Bills and Overtures Committee had on this subject. And what we really struggled with was not the hot button issue. We know it's a really important issue that needs to be dealt with and dealt with strongly. And so in the guise of, in this framework of Me Too, it's really important that we do take serious action. And we were struggling because the language that was offered in the overture and the amendment is really so very poorly written as to be overly vague and overly broad, and could ensnare in this unwitting people unwittingly. It says that there's no time limit for charging, that a person, any person, who knew or reasonably should have known. I mean, if you were a lawyer and you were listening to this language language is so broad, it could include anyone. And then it says who knew, should have known of the reasonable risk, or failed to take reasonable steps to minimize the risk. So it's just layer upon layer of vagueness and ambiguity that we really feel should be undertaken by the task force to clarify and be written well. And the existing language as it stands, that says, for instances of sexual abuse of another person, the 5-year time limit shall not apply, and charges may be brought regardless of the date on which an offense is alleged. Those two statements by themselves really do carry the issue sufficiently until it can be worded more better, as my kids would say. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the person against.
Before he was, yeah.
Yeah, Emily.
I'd like to speak against the motion. My name is Emily Rhodes Hunter. I'm a teaching elder out of New York. I'm a parish associate at New York Avenue and a temporary stated supply at Herndon, and I'm a hospice chaplain. I've actually never spoken on the floor of Presbytery before, I guess, other than coming before you to join your ranks. But I felt like for this issue I needed to say something in particular. And I want to speak to this motion both personally and professionally. Personally, I said, I want to speak against the motion to take no action. I want you to act. I want you to approve this amendment as it's written, because we need strong language about this issue. I want to tell you a little bit about how this would have impacted me. As a child who was abused from age 6 to age 14, so many people knew about it and did nothing. My parents knew because I told them. My pastors, 2 pastors, because my church during that long span of time was in the midst of transition, 2 pastors I told, and they did nothing. My Sunday school teacher knew and did nothing. Those people should be held accountable. And I think this language is sorely needed. We can always walk language back later. And I'm moving into professionally now. If we were to wait, there's an urgency is what I'm trying to convey. There's an urgency to this language that we really need to seize upon. If we were to wait, let's say we approve this motion to take no action. If we were to wait and say, we need to clarify this language a little bit, it's a little too vague, like we want tighter language. If we were to wait, that would take another 2-3 years from what they said in the open space gathering immediately preceding this meeting. if we were to deny this motion to take no action and we approved this amendment as it's written, this would go into effect in June. There's an urgency to this. And so I really ask you to think about the impact that this could have and the message that we could send as a church. During my time here in the area, I also volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, accompanying people to the hospital after they've experienced sexual assault. And one of the reasons that I do that as a teaching elder, as a minister, as a pastor, is because the church hasn't always been a safe place for people like me. And it needs to be. And this is one step closer to that. If we were to approve this as is, if we were to vote against this idea to take no action. In our pastoral transitions prayer earlier tonight, Karen quoted Dr. King, and I want to do that again. I remind you that he also said that justice delayed is justice denied. I urge you to vote against this motion to wait and to delay and to revise to get the perfect lingo and the precise language. Yes, it's broad, but if this goes into effect in June, we can walk it back. We can always tighten the language up a little bit more. I guess that's what I'm recommending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone speaking in favor of the motion? I think we'll call on one more, and then we'll proceed to a vote. Yes, sir.
Jay Loser, interim head of staff at Gaithersburg Presbyterian Church. Mike, I have a question of the moderator on point of order, basically, and that is, if we want to vote it up or down, should we vote no on the no action, and will there be a motion after that to vote it up or down?
Yes, that's exactly right. If we do not want to agree to this motion, then we vote it down, and we immediately proceed without debate to a yes or no vote.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? All right then. So we will vote. All those in favor of the recommendation that the Presbytery take no action on this amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those in favor, not in favor of that action, please say nay. Nay. The nays have it. We will go then immediately to the amendment, which you've heard and heard a great deal about. All those in favor of approving this amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Amendment H1 is approved. Thank you.
Well, Madam Moderator, that concludes my report, and I think you're doing a great job, so why don't you just keep going?
Madam Moderator, a question of clarification.
Yes, sir.
The moderator, who is also reporting for bills and overtures, the man of many hats, I just wanted a clarification. You mentioned you're going to be writing a letter. By the way, Stephen Smith Cobbs, co-pastor, Trinity Presbyterian. I'm on COM and also have continued to serve when called upon with the clergy response team. I'm hoping that in addition to writing to the appropriate body that you mentioned earlier, but you mentioned also there's a group that's starting to work or will be formed to start to work on the rules of discipline. It strikes me that it would be helpful for this same concern about language to be shared with them as well.
That's who the Bills and Overtures Committee
Right.
intends
That's why I was asking for
to be
clarification.
the
Thank
receiver of this letter. It's not clear to us yet if we need Presbytery's approval or not of the contents of the letter, but you'll get more about that, at least it's our plan, at the March meeting.
Thank you.
And can I just say a word as the moderator, or not as the moderator, as whatever I am, the chair of the Bills and Overtures Committee. None of us are disappointed that you so soundly voted against our recommendation. We wrestled with it, and and we thought, well, this is the most responsible, given all the conversation that we had, to raise it to you and to see what you wanted to do with it. And so I think I can speak for all of us that we're just very happy that you did with it what you did.
Thank you. Thank you, Quinn. I now invite Elder David McClung, who is Vice Chair of the Leadership Council, to address the motion on page 12 of your packet regarding the Administrative Commission for the Riverdale Presbyterian Church. And will you also give us an update on the tool?
Yes, thank you. Before I get to the motion on Riverdale, I would like to, on behalf of the Leadership Council, give you an update on the Financial Planning Task Force and its work. As mentioned at the last meeting, the Leadership Council has appointed a Financial Planning Task Force and asked that group to develop a planning tool to help assess the budgetary impact of various decisions the Presbytery could make over the next several years. The task force, which is headed by Reverend Beth Goss of the Church of the Covenant, has made great progress. A lot of thanks goes to Todd McCright for helping craft this tool. We had expected to provide an update of this effort at tonight's open space, but Reverend Goss was unavailable due to a family emergency. The task force plans to continue its work by engaging in discussions with the National Capital Presbytery committees and teams over the next few weeks. We will schedule a time at the open space for the March meeting to present the planning tool and to seek additional input. For your information, the members of the task force are Charles Barber, Pat Furtado, myself, and Reverend Goss as the chair. In addition, we've asked Mark Gaskell of the Mission Coordinating Council, Diane Hendricks of the Church Development Committee, and the Reverend Bob Erickson as an at-large representative to help us in this effort. So stay tuned. Now, as to the motion from the Leadership Council in Riverdale. At the unanimous invitation of the Riverdale Presbyterian Church session and the recommendation of the Church Development Commission, the Leadership Council moves that Presbytery designate an administrative commission for Riverdale Presbyterian Church, members to be appointed by the moderator. This commission will assume original jurisdiction of the session if the administrative commission sees the wisdom of doing so. Develop a strategic plan for the congregation in consultation with the congregation to include development of a mission plan and possible relocation. Report to the Presbytery any additional recommendations for action regarding Riverdale Presbyterian Church. And report quarterly the progress and decisions of the Administrative Commission to the stated clerk of the Presbytery. Karen Chamis can share further insights as to how this has been developed. Thank you.
Several years ago, Riverdale sold their property, and the money from that sale was put into trust, which is being held by the Presbytery. The understanding is that that money would be used for the development of a new church building, a new ministry someplace. And they've been struggling for the last 3.5 years to figure out how to begin to do that work. We've worked with them. CDC has come in and worked with them. We've sent in teams, we've brought in consultants, and each time we get a little closer and then a little further away. They're at a point, at a juncture in their life where there's the remnant there is excited and passionate and really hopeful, and there's some real potential there, but they need some help with the leadership aspect of things. And so the hope was that by bringing in a soft AC, an AC that wouldn't assume original jurisdiction unless absolutely necessary, a group of folk that could come in and could help model leadership, could help them in making decisions, could help ask some of the really difficult questions that need to be asked, would be one way of coming alongside this congregation. We've done this before, church. We did this with Northwood. We brought in a soft AC there and worked with them, and things have gone well in that particular situation. I know people hear administrative commission and they go into panic mode and they begin to think, oh my gosh, it's a takeover. That is not what this is at all. This is an opportunity to come alongside and support. And in meeting with the session, they are encouraged by this. We gave them several different options, several different ways that they might go about doing this next step. This was the one that they chose. And so I would ask that you would support this. Certainly, if you have any questions, I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay.
The motion is before you, does not require a second. Are there any questions? Is there any debate?
I do have just
Yes, sir.
a question. I'm Fred Bias from National Presbyterian Ruling Elder. I'm forgetful of any of the details regarding Riverdale. How large was the congregation when they sold their property? How large is it now? And just some of the fundamentals. I just don't have any background on that.
Is Lucy here?
Now, your question was, what is the status of our church at this point?
Excuse me, could you just tell us who you are?
I'm Lucy Bowerman. I am the stated supply at
Thank you.
Riverdale Presbyterian Church and their transitional minister. Our congregation has about 65 and worship each week, solid attendance. We have 15 to 20 children and a active children's ministry. There are additional members who are homebound. I don't know what else to say. I came into the church about a year ago after the previous pastor left. The congregation was tired. And so we have spent time healing, and the congregation has continued to stay bonded to one another. These are 65 people who, and children who have weathered a lot of storms and who are ready to learn about what it means to. The session is learning about governing the congregation and about working together and in the name of Christ. And so we are ready to, the congregation sold the building, but we actually rent the space from the owners, the new owners. And we learn what it is to not have to have the responsibility for a building, which can be quite an advantage. But at some point in time, we will want to have our own space so that we can stretch out in our worship time. We are limited on that, and have more functions. The congregation that we're nested within is very gracious to us. We are almost half, or at least half, Cameroon membership, and we do celebrate quite a bit in the times of our of losses, and when we have baptisms, we have big celebrations in the fellowship hall, and the sponsors have been gracious to us in every way. If there are other questions, I guess that would. Does
Thank
that
you.
satisfy?
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Is there any debate? Then we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor of an administrative commission for Riverdale Presbyterian Church, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Thank you. The motion is agreed to. Thank you, David. Thank you, Karen. I now invite Lawan Quander to introduce this evening's mission video. Following that, we will continue with worship, and without objection, this meeting will be adjourned with the benediction. We do ask that at the conclusion, if you would just gather up your trash and toss it in a proper receptacle and take the loose papers that are at your table to the table at the back of the hall. That would be greatly appreciated. The staff would like to go home too. Thank you very much. Luan.
Well, 2 times in one night. I have to go back to my previous celebrated self. My mother would say, "Little girl, you were not raised in a barn." I forgot to thank the wonderful staff I work with. Thank you guys so much for singing and doing what you did. I also need to thank the Personnel Committee. Duh. I don't know how I forgot to do that. But for the members of the Personnel Committee, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and your generosity is truly appreciated. So now I'm going to put on my Director of Communication hat, and we're going to view a mission highlight video. On your tables, you see insert bulletins. They're just reminders that you got these at the beginning of this particular media campaign. We are in the 3rd video of 4. This one is going to highlight resources that National Capital Presbytery provides that I think many of you are not too aware of, the many resources in terms of human and financial resources that you, through your unified mission given, provide to all of the presbytery. So I encourage you to look over this bulletin insert. We have more at the office. Again, these videos are online, www.thepresbytery.org. They're also available on our YouTube channel, National Capital Presbytery. No further ado, Ben?
So when I think about resourcing congregations into the 21st century, I imagine a resource basket, something that is filled with all the things that our various committees can offer.
The National Capital Presbyteries work very hard on being connectional. It's one of our cornerstones of how we function.
One of the underutilized tools in that resource basket is equipping grants. We offer equipping grants for both congregations and leaders. And it's not just congregations that are in need, it's also congregations that have an idea. They may not have funding for it elsewhere, they may not have expertise. And that's the other thing that we give as well, is expertise.
The Spiritual Formation Team is designed to walk alongside congregations as they seek to equip their leadership and create disciples and empower the members of their congregation to do that work.
As a team, we provide programs throughout the year, but we also provide scholarships and grants to individuals who are in need to maybe attend different educators conferences or upcoming events.
The Church Development Committee, CDC, they offer everything from expertise with transforming churches to doing different types of work with congregations from cradle to grave.
Mission Coordinating Committee serves as a catalyst to really drive mission activities within the church. We work to connect congregations, support them, and equip them. So our active networks are the Global Mission Network, the Earth Care Network, the Refugee Ministry Network, the Israel-Palestine Network, and the Disaster Response Network. And so the networks are really just a way to bring people together and be that connectional church that is so important to us.
It's been exciting to see how our churches have utilized the funds that are available. I just wish more congregations would take advantage of it.
Together,
we are making a difference.
What's in your mission giving budget?
have the pleasure to introduce the next two presenters, and I will start with Casey Waite FitzGerald. She is a pastor at John Calvin Presbyterian Church in Annandale, Virginia, and a master biblical storyteller. She has her BA in religion from Colgate University and an MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary, and her master certification in biblical storytelling through the Academy of Storytelling, and is a member of the Network of Biblical Storytellers. Prior to her current call, Casey served for over a decade at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Alexandria, Virginia. She has performed biblical stories and led workshops in various settings, including churches, seminaries, and national conferences. Casey believes that a return to the oral tradition of sharing the stories of God is essential for the formation of disciples now and in the future. Through her preaching, blogs, video, and podcasts, Casey encourages all to learn and to tell the stories of God. Amen. And I'm just going to go right into Becca, and then they will come. Amen. Becca Messman is wife to Dave and mom to Grace and Davis and a crazy dog, her words, named Luna. Daughter-in-law of Rachel Messman, also a presbyter here. She is co-pastor at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Herndon, where she has served for 12 and a half years. She helped found Lunch for the Soul, a weekly fellowship of Spanish day laborers in Herndon, and the DC Young Adult Volunteer Program. She is currently co-chair of Voice, a large multi-faith organization that recently paved the way for the governor of Virginia to budget $36 million for mental health services for adolescents and for the Attorney General of Virginia. Also, a Presbyterian. To call for an end, Becca has also worked to call for an end to cash bail, one of the causes of mass incarceration. Please join me in welcoming them.
Can I use one of these?
Yes.
Can I, is the other question. Do I need to do anything to it? Hello? Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he cuts it off. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes it to clean it, to make it grow more fruit. You have already been cleansed because of the word I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I abide in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. But if you abide in me and my words abide in you, then ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and I abide in his love. Now I say this to you so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. This is the story of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Startle us again, O God, with hope, with joy, with complete joy that comes in abiding together. And, O Lord, uphold me that I might uplift thee. Amen. The Gospel of John reads like a poem, doesn't it? Like one that the late Mary Oliver would have loved. You have this image from nature emerging crisp and familiar. I can see the vineyard. I see the vineyard keeper tromping in God's muddy boots, snapping off brown branches and trimming curly green vines, eyeing a plump grape beaded with rainwater. Then, in a flash of truth, which is the way poets work, the vineyard is life itself. We are green vines. What is trying to flow is love, and what is trying to grow is joy. And what are we to do, O people of God? John says we remain. Some translations prefer abide. We stay. We stay. Now, it's tempting to respond, is that all? Hang in there. Hang in there. I confess I often really prefer the practical to the poetic. I'd sometimes prefer Mark's gospel that moves breathlessly from one Jesus in exchange to the next. Sometimes I relish Matthew. All that heft of Hebrew scholarship crashing into the Jesus moment. Sometimes I want to pound the pulpit with Luke, bringing all of the social justice heat into view. But John poetically, quietly says, remain. Remain connected. Stay grafted into the true vine. Abide. And it strikes me sometimes that remaining, abiding together, is the most important call there is. And sometimes the hardest. The other day I was at a clergy lunch. Well, it turns out it was a bring your own lunch, which not everyone read in the email. A cost-saving plan that would have been forgivable had not also the coffee pot malfunctioned. pouring out all over the table, so we were not starting off on the right foot that day. And then, in awkwardness, regular pastor talk ensued. What do you worship? We worship about 200, but our ASAs are up about 300%. The bounce house ministry has really helped. Folks turn their heads to the large, very large bounce house in the fellowship hall. Kids rising and falling on a random Thursday. People said, which is the sound of being both refined and wildly impressed. And then I said, excuse me, ASAs, I'm not familiar. And then 4 people chanted together, average Sunday attendance. Oh yeah, we have metrics for everything. I can tell you how many givers you need per parking space to remain in ministry. Another pastor said sheepishly, we were just told we are not viable. Our building to clergy ratio is not good. The consultant's graph gives us 2 years tops. Folks kind of sighed. And then a rabbi, my friend Michael, blurted out, does anyone else find this deeply disturbing? I want my people to be talking about God, not parking space graphs. And an African-American Baptist woman's eyes welled with tears. And she said, yes, by all those numbers, we have no future. We make no sense. We're a little church that's taken big risks to be a welcoming space to gay and trans people. Maybe the only one like it for miles. And you know what? We actually believe that Jesus wants this congregation to remain. Well, I left that not lunch meeting, my stomach grumbling, but my soul grumbling too. Well, which one tells us who we are? Is it the graph or the graft? Is it that stubborn vine of Jesus Christ? The graph says that congregations are losing members, that the cultural winds are in our face, that churches are splintered and hurting, and our country is fraying at the seams. But the graft, that ancient vine, says, love one another. Bear fruit. The graph says there's not enough. There's not enough young families, not enough pledging units, not enough hours in the day to turn this ship around. But the graft says, my grace is sufficient. It says, I'm about to do a new thing. It springs up. Do you not see it? The graph says, your worth and viability can be found on columns 1 and 2 of the annual statistical report. And that graph haunts pastors. I've heard people say, if it's all about the numbers, and I start to calculate what I earn per hour, especially throwing in holidays, I think I'd make more working at Target. But the graft holds on even tighter. And we hear our voices say, where would we go, Lord? You alone have the words of life. The graft sets our foot upon the rock, puts a new song in our mouth. We even trip over a shoot of new growth that we had no idea was even there. It was not in our session's 3-year plans, and yet there it is, beaded with the waters of baptism. Now, don't get me wrong, I love graphs. I'm the daughter of 2 Presbyterian accountants, which means I'm predestined to love numbers. But I have become convinced that when we worship a few of our numbers, if we give them authority to dictate our identity and viability, we have made them into an idol. And that's also true about bank accounts and scales. It's also true about church budgets and attendance. The graph may tell us about our past, but only the graph, that place where we connect to the grace of Jesus Christ, lays claim to our present and our future. So all this got stirred up about a decade ago when I noticed this odd thing going on with our graph at Trinity Presbyterian in Herndon. Our weekly attendance was going from 300 to 224. But our building was telling us something different. There were about 180 people worshiping in Spanish on Wednesday as part of Lunch for the Soul, our weekly outreach with Spanish-speaking day laborers. But our graph did not know this because they would never join our pledge. And then a year later, a new Ghanaian congregation started worshiping in Tree on Sundays at noon, and usually the congas would start calling people to worship downstairs at the precise moment when I was upstairs saying, "Let us continue our prayers now in silence." And the floor rumbled with praise, but the graph was unfazed because they affiliate with a different denomination. And then Urdu-speaking Presbyterians would hustle in around 1 p.m., and the harmonium would bend around these old hymns, 20 voices singing and clapping, but the graph could not catch them because they were considered a fellowship. And then, when 600 people gathered to pray and weep together because one of our most beloved youth had passed away in a horrible car crash, the graph callously ticked down by 1. The graph has no patience for millennials who visit for years and attend our Saturday food distribution more often than Sunday school, and they give money to the mission trip but not the operating fund. And I feel bad for the graph because the graph keeps falling exhausted as these lines start to blur between congregation and community, it's getting bewildered by these new patterns of commitment and connection. And it's not just our graphs that are sweating. You see, since the 70s, companies and nonprofits have changed their way of measuring things too. Most of them have abandoned this idea of a single bottom line. They like to talk about their impact as an organization, rather than just being a set of inputs and outputs. Did you know that Netflix doesn't use the Nielsen ratings? They prefer to assess their company, how their company is doing, by how their content affects the culture. They want to gauge how they're doing by how their content affects the culture. Sounds familiar. Now, I'm preaching here today because I got to be part of a team of these ornery Presbyterians who wrote a book called Cultivated Ministry. It was written by a team of 8 artists and church planters, professors and pastors and business leaders, folks who know that there is a better way to talk about congregational effectiveness in ministry than just do better than last year. Do better than them. And so here's a quick snapshot. Cultivated Ministry suggests that there are 4 movements that are needed when we talk about congregational effectiveness. And first is theology. Theology is a way of gathering our effectiveness. Why are we doing this thing? How does this usher in the kingdom of God? How does this bring in the commonwealth of God's love? Second, learning. And here's where all the graphs and the traditional metrics find their useful place. But only if we say, what did we learn through all of this? Third, something called mutual accountability. We need to clarify who is on our teams and what we are trying to achieve. What impact are we trying to have? And how will we know if that happened? And then finally, storytelling. We need to tell the story of lives that have been changed. And it is happening. And even an amazing graft can't do that. But the graft can. This true vine curls around new people very well. It can go up, it can go down, it can go out, it can go deep in. And this vine operates on this funny math of God, where mustard seeds multiply into subversive and hospitable trees. And a few loaves multiply into food for thousands. This vine, it actually thrives on pruning because it knows that when something dies, new life comes. I suspect that most of us feel like we're inhabiting this kind of agricultural meantime, this middle place between staring at this old vine and seeing the harvest. We want to trust in God to bring all this good work to fruition. We want to trust the light and the waters to do their thing. But we also want to help it along. So we tend to do these other fourfold movements, which is anxiety. Let's imagine all the things that could go wrong. Perfectionism, which is we must have everything in order so there can be no doubt that we did our part correctly. Moral outrage. That's when we start to don this protective layer because we believe that the conditions in our world may have grown too harsh for vulnerable love, even if that starts to make our fruit taste bitter. And then finally, dread. Dread, this fear that we will wither alone on the vine. So ultimately, cultivated ministry, all of this talk, is about courage. It's about adopting the practices of courage that allow us to remain together. Courage to be an honest to God church. Courage to face our life and death and our mysterious God and our unknown future without letting anxiety and perfectionism and rage and dread poison us to a hungry world. And if living is what we are about, then we must be brave and hang on to God and to each other every day. Anxiety would have us check the graph every day to see if the roots are growing. Anxiety would prefer a nice small indoor pot where we can avoid the snow of doubt and the heat of pain. But clinging to the true vine means we will dwell outside, but we will grow hardy with courage. But the good news is, according to John, the fruit of abiding like this, the fruit of courage, is complete joy. And I believe that. I've seen that in this room, the joy of a small church that springs up in a space where other plants would not fit. Joy of a large church who knows that last year, for better or for worse, does not define them. Joy of a pastor nourished by real friendship. Joy at the sound of congas twirling with the sound of an organ. Joy at the sound of affordable housing units winding around a sanctuary. Joy of a church that gives her life as fuel for a new thing to be born. Joy as the old walls of prejudice and shame crumble away under the curious heft of the old vine of Jesus Christ, and every new wall trembles. I'm gratified that joy has never been linear. It prefers all of those details that graphs miss. I think about the teardrop that hangs on the edge of her nose as she remembers her beloved. I think about the curl of a baby's ear. I think about the lump in the throat. And that odd graph where the cross leads to everlasting life and peace with God. So let us remain. Let us abide in that joy. And as tempting as it may be to be anywhere else, let us not miss the joy. I think I remember what the chief end of humanity is. And there's some educators here who can remind me. Does it go, the chief end of humanity is to populate the graph on an annual basis and to improve it forever? No. The chief end of humanity is to glorify God and love God, enjoy God forever. May it be so.
The spiritual formation team of National Capital Presbytery is committed to resourcing churches for the work of ministry in the 21st century. One of these resources is Cultivated Ministry, published by Next Church. Many of those themes you heard Becca lift up tonight in her sermon. Storytelling is an essential piece of Cultivated Ministry. And so I invite you to share your stories around your table as our table discussion tonight. And you will see the prompts on the screen.
Since we have already adjourned this meeting after the words of our moderator, I invite you to go now, or stay because we're an hour early. No. Go now with cleaning up your tables and putting all of the articles into their necessary receptacles and recycling. But more than that, go knowing that the Lord of love, of joy, of hope, of peace, of all of our futures knit together in the true vine, goes with you, goes before you, goes behind you, and even abides in you this day and forevermore. Amen. Amen.
Well, it had to come down. You were examples. Yes, 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 yes. Gave us encouragement and strength.